will recall in, I think, May or June, we talked through the idea of doing a sort of comprehensive evaluation of the Community Development Fund. We kind of want to look at a variety of different areas. We want to look at the sort of start to finish, both how the application and the program is structured, to both sort of how we're doing outreach and communications. We want to look at the what we're asking applicants to respond to, and kind of what we're asking them to submit to us. So sort of just kind of looking at the whole process and seeing if we want to tweak anything. The last time we reviewed the whole process, it's been over 10 years, and there hasn't been a substantial sort of restructure or anything in that time. We've tweaked some of the questions, we've kind of tweaked the process a little bit, but it really hasn't been restructured or reviewed. And we've also never evaluated it sort of using an equity lens, and kind of looking at it from the perspective of, who's benefiting, who's burdened, who's missing. How do we know that, the sort of using that racial equity framework? So what we wanted to do is, the goal of the evaluation is to create a more equitable, inclusive process and just promote healthier competition, and ultimately a better user experience among our applicants. We want to make sure that that people know about the opportunity, that they're, that the applicants are not sort of burdened by our application process or the structure of the application process. And so the areas that we wanted to look at are sort of the overall funding structure and the NOFA structure in general. What are the priorities of the Community Development Fund? What does the application actually look like? So what questions are we asking? What are we asking people to submit? What's the evaluation and review process? So that's both, what are folks being evaluated against, but also, how is the committee involved, and sort of what's the process that the committee goes through. Again, we want to look at outreach and communications, technical assistance, sort of how we're, both assisting applicants in completing the application, but also making sure that they know that the application exists. We want to look at some of the post application features, sort of how we're communicating with applicants after the fact, and how how they are, and how we're reviewing the process after the fact. But we also want to look at sort of our internal processes as it relates to monitoring grants, ongoing project management, and also sort of the closeout process in general. So it's kind of looking at it, we're hoping to take a kind of comprehensive look at the process. Go ahead.
Can we ask TD behind the scenes to minimize?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll minimize it. I can do it. So as far as the structure, the co-leads of the sort of process is going to be myself and a woman named Jennifer Sco, who works in CPHD. She's in the director's office. And she kind of is someone who works on special projects in CPHD. And so I asked her to participate because I thought it would be helpful to have someone who's kind of almost a third party, who can kind of help bounce ideas off of. I mean, I'm very involved in the process as it is, and sometimes when you own something, it's hard to take an honest look at it. So she's going to help with, that. She's going to serve that in that role, but she's also going to help with kind of moderating and facilitating discussions, and helping with the applicant and grantee survey and focus groups and things like that, just to be kind of that neutral voice. And then we have Jennifer, Rolda, and Zena, who will of course participate and kind of support on the staff team. We're also hoping to create a subcommittee under CDCAC, where current members would participate in monthly meetings to help to just provide guidance on the overall evaluation process. And we can kind of talk a little bit about what that would look like in a minute. We, again, want to be involving past applicants and current grantees. We're envisioning doing a survey, focus groups on their applicant experience, challenges, what works, what they would change, you know, kind of really honing in on some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And then we're also, you know, going to be checking in with other county departments and grant managers across the county. We're hoping to start having broader conversations with other grant managers, sort of cross county, to kind of just share best practices and do some more information sharing on that level. That's kind of just starting. That process is just kind of starting to get off the ground. And we're hoping that those check-ins will kind of inform this process, but that there's still a little bit of to be determined on that end while we kind of wait to see what that structure will look like. So again, this is just kind of some of the outputs and sort of touch points that we want to have throughout the process. So we're going to be looking at participation data, history, funding amounts, kind of just reviewing what we've done, you know, probably over the last 5 to 10 years or so. Again, doing some surveying, some focus groups that will be informed by that survey. And then I did want to talk a little bit more about what exactly this subcommittee would look like. So we're envisioning 5 subcommittee meetings, probably between January and May of next year. And the idea is that each of those meetings would, you know, take a group of, you know, issue areas that we want to look at and kind of try to come to consensus on some recommended changes through that subcommittee. And then, you know, we would, the meetings would be outside of regular CDCAC meetings, so it would be an additional responsibility. We're really hoping that we can get a mix of members who have participated pretty regularly in the process over the years, but you know, others who might have experience with other sort of grant processes or programs. We're looking to recruit 3 to 5 members, and of course, it's all volunteer. So if you're interested, or if you don't have time, that's totally fine. But that's kind of what we were thinking there, and hopefully it sounds like something that you would be interested in. Then we can kind of we can talk about that in a minute. So as far as the timeline, so right now we're discussing this evaluation and sort of the subcommittee requirements. We're just starting to think through reviewing this past NOFA funding and best practice research, and, you know, hoping to design a survey based on that data review. We're hoping that the survey of past applicants can happen starting in November, and that we would do our focus groups in December of this year. Again, we're looking at through January through May doing the subcommittee meetings, and then hoping to have preliminary recommendations for the full CDCAC committee to review in May of next year, and then the final recommendations considered by CDCAC in June. And then, of course, we usually release the NOFA in July, so that would come out the following month. So I think that's the last slide that I have. Oh, okay, so next steps. So again, we're looking for volunteers for the subcommittee. You don't have to jump at it now, so it's something we're going to think about, and we can talk sort of more about what that actually would look like. They are likely going to be in-person meetings just because of the way that just because of our committee rules. I don't think there's a way to really get around that. So again, it would be an additional you know, meeting to attend for between January and May. And I keep repeating that because I just want to be really upfront about the time commitment, because I know, you know, our busy time in October is coming up, so I just want to make sure it's clear about that. And then I think we should also, you know, based on who volunteers, and then appoint a chair of the subcommittee to kind of help keep things on track. And then again, we're hoping to have our first meeting likely sometime in January of next year. So, yeah. If it's something you want to think about, totally fine. Does anyone have any questions just in general about the scope? Yeah.
For the 5 meetings, it seems that there's 3 different themes. one is the 10,000-foot level.
Yeah.
Who are we and what do we want to do? Then there's the annual application and review, and then there's the outreach. So there are three independent things. Would you consider not having 5 people do all of that, but to have like one subcommittee work on one subcommittee work on the other, the 3 different areas, if there's enough interest? Now, if there's only 2 people that volunteer at all, then I guess you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, if it shapes out that everyone's interested, then we could maybe structure it that way. But yeah, I think it depends on.
It would reduce the time commitment instead of saying, 5 meetings and tons of material.
I think there's also going to be some overlap between what we discussed. So I can see the benefit of having some continuity between participation in those meetings. But yeah, it's something to consider. And does anyone have any questions about the sort of scope? And I mean, does it make sense as far as what we talked about this year?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that based on what we talked about in that meeting we had where we kind of did our normal debrief and sort of small tweaks, and we made that 2-column document where we put some stuff on the in the parking lot. This sort of reflects that, and what's written here feels to me like will get us to making some decisions on those items.
Okay.
Staff is going to collect feedback and talk to applicants. I assume we're going to take some of that feedback in the subcommittee and incorporate that into some of that brainstorming session we did before.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important piece of it, is to hear from past applicants and hear what their experience has been.
But you also said, sorry, right, so I know.
Okay.
But I think I heard you also say that you were gonna talk to some other, like some other entities around here or collect what others do.
Yeah, we'd
To
like
some
to do
extent.
some best practice research. And whether that's just talking to local jurisdictions, we're also members of some national organizations. We have great relationships with other HUD grantees across the country, and we're maybe we talk to some of those that we know also do public service activities and things like that. But yeah, that's definitely part of the
Yeah, because I think, it may be interesting to see whether what we hear from the grantees is at all reflective of, how honest they're gonna be, because they've got something on the line.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
I would agree, and that's why the first thing that I thought was don't have staff talk to the applicants, don't have anybody that's even remotely associated with this process talk to the applicants, so they can just really give a good dump and not feel that, well, because they're not dumb and they're gonna put some filter on it, and I think what we really want is filtered feedback so we can really look critically at the process. I don't know who those people are, but
Yeah, so that's kind of why I'm excited that our colleague Jennifer Sco, who was going to attend tonight, but she had something else come up kind of last minute. Yeah, no, she's not on the meeting. But she was gonna kind of take some of the lead on at least some of the focus groups pieces to so that we don't have that issue.
yeah. I think the ideas that you've put down and that you're looking at through the process are good, and I think they'll come up with some good results. You got to get your superstars on that 5 members for the subcommittee.
Yeah.
I have a question because I'd be interested to see from the applicants to hear what they feel they wanted to put in the application, but they couldn't. Like what is that gray area in between? They're like, we've done this, but there's no place to put it in the application because we want to see you guys, see what's happening and things like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like that would be an interesting ask of when we do the applicant the applicant reviews. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Well, I I think we can move on if that.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask one last question.
Oh, sure.
How and by when should we let you know if we want to?
So I think what I'll do is I'll send a follow-up email after this meeting. And you can volunteer, and if you're interested, you can volunteer anonymously, or you can volunteer now. I mean, it's total. I'm not, but yeah, no. I mean, I don't want to put people on the spot now. I know sometimes people have to think about it, look at their schedules. But yeah, we can. You can just email me.
I mean, I'm happy to put my name in.
Thank you, Laura. All right. Okay, so do we want to move on to the next topic? Okay, Laura, I'm gonna let you kick things
So I think
off.
we're on number 3, right?
Yes.
So, Maureen, thank you for being here, and this is part of one of the reasons why we're happy to have you here. So we have been hearing about and talking about as a committee this race to rebuilding trust and community grant opportunities. And so I think part of this is we'd like to hear a little bit from you about some of your thoughts, and I have a couple questions for you, and other folks may as well. The background that we've gotten so far on this opportunity, which, you know, we understand is similar and kind of, there are sort of
Similar and different, yes.
like there are sort of cross points here and there with what we do here in CDCAC. And so we heard about this from Elizabeth, right, who I think is on the line.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Several months ago, kind of early in the process, if I'm correct on that, I don't remember exactly when, about what this was going to look like, what this new grant competition was going to look like. And that did raise some questions for us and some conversation around that. And then we appreciated a lot of feedback after the review took place to kind of give us some details about how that went and what that was all like. So this is kind of like our third discussion around this. And so I think I have a couple questions for you, and then I'm sure Will as well. But first, I wonder if, Maureen, you wouldn't mind kind of giving us your take on this grant competition and sort of where they complement each other and what, you know, how that is looking from your point of view.
Yeah, so I think as you all probably know, based on your previous discussions, this effort predates my time on the board. And I know Elizabeth is on, and so Elizabeth, please interrupt me at any point if I start to stray, because you have way more of the background knowledge than I do. But, you know, the county has given many different nonprofits and entities money from a human services perspective, especially for a lot of different reasons, whether that is homelessness services, aging services, things that are important to us as a county. And that has come separately from the CDBG dollars that we get from HUD. And so those dollars are far less restricted and far less, you know, if it's county money, then you need 3 votes of a board members, and that's how you get it. And so the purpose of the race NOFA was to really say, calling your favorite board member is not a really good way to get money from the county. That does not comply with our equity standards. It certainly, you know, the amount of engagement and things that you all do as a commission in order to make decisions and make sure that you're giving our county dollars responsibly, you know, doesn't quite align with, well, you know, I heard about this really great nonprofit and I think they really deserve $20,000. You know, that I think that was the frame we were really trying to move away from. And so in partnership with United Way, there was a bunch of community engagement with nonprofit leaders and other folks to kind of say, you know, what has your experience been? How can we do this in a way that is helpful for your organization, but it's also kind of not prescriptive, right? Like that we weren't putting, well, we want to fund housing efforts. We want to fund healthcare, social determinants of health efforts, but really to say, what do people across the community see as an important thing so that we can then evaluate the strength of it based on that. And so all of the applications and things happened before my time, and we got to see kind of the evaluation of that once I was on the board. And we funded a lot of different projects this year. I think one of the challenges that I definitely had was seeing that kind of across the Arlington County organization, like where are other people getting money? If you think about, Doorways, for example, is one of our very well-known social service nonprofits. They were getting what in my mind was like a very small dollar amount through the race no fund. I was kind of like, that doesn't really make sense to me. They do so many things. Like, how can this be enough? And then it's like, oh, well, they have a contract with the county, and then they are also part of this other. And so seeing that to me was one of the big challenges. I think that's probably also one of the challenges you all have discussed, is knowing what's happening on the other sides of the wall. And so I think we learned a lot from the first round. United Way did post grant decision follow-ups with all of the applicants that wanted it, both to kind of work through their application and give them feedback on things that they could improve, why they got scores that they got, but also to get from them information about like, how can we improve the NOFA process. And so I think, a lot of the nonprofits are seeking county dollars from wherever they can find it, and are highly likely to apply both within that process as well as the CDBG process. But I think, there's significant flexibility in the county dollars that HUD doesn't necessarily give to the CDBG dollars. And I think, there's a little bit of maybe a different set of evaluation criteria because of that as well. Elizabeth, I'm going to pause there if you have other things to say in terms of how that complements and coincides with the CDCAC grant process.
I think you covered the basic history of how the race pot of funding came about, and the focus, we're trying to make the focus of it really be about equity and building up smaller nonprofits. It's a work in progress that we're continually improving, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one of the big things as well, in terms of really the focus on race and equity, is obviously Arlington can be very white and overrun by whiter, wealthier people. And so making sure that there is an opportunity for a brand new organization that may not have the capacity to do a really complex grant application, but might still really benefit from some amount of money, to have pathways where they can kind of get that initial start and kind of grow from there. But that we're not just excluding, only restricting ourselves to the people who have a grant writer or have someone who can really go through and check all of the right boxes because they've done it like 10 times before. And yeah, the race NOFA included a lot of technical assistance from Elizabeth and other folks in terms of just helping to understand what it was that the application was looking for and things like that. And I think that was really appreciated, especially from organizations who had never applied for county funding before.
Yeah, that's helpful. And so you touched on this, and I think that the kind of next piece of this is, when we first heard about this, our initial thought was the applicant pool is going to be very simple, right? And it turned out to be true that, the folks who were funded are part of our applicant pool. So I think it would be helpful to kind of have a conversation about strategies and ways to move forward in terms of acknowledging that overlap and figuring out how to most effectively work within it to, make sure that the programs who are deserving of it and can make a difference in the community are getting funded in a way that works for them, works for the county, and the right money is getting in the right hands of the right people and kind of working in tandem with these other programs to kind of figure out how to connect that. So I definitely be interested in your thoughts on.
Yeah, I think we got a recent briefing on kind of some of the outcomes from United Way's like post-grant focus groups and interviews and things like that. And I think that was really interesting. And I think one of the conversations that we were having in my briefing was kind of like, at some point we really have to engage on the like, what is this for? If do we want for the race NOFA for someone who applies every single year for 5 years and has the best application to just continue to get the money, or is the purpose to really say like, okay, well, like we gave you 3 successive years of funding and now you kind of need to find another funding source. And so I think some of that is kind of undetermined amongst the board right now. And so definitely very open to feedback. But, kind of recognizing also that there's historically and probably always insufficient funding to go to all of the really deserving nonprofits and groups across the county. And so I think you're right, like being strategic, and to me, I think really making sure that everyone has a more comprehensive view is part of that, and making sure, your evaluation cycle is coming up here in October, but the race grant applications won't even open until October, I think that's right, Elizabeth. And
September, hopefully.
September, even earlier, but like won't close until December and won't be evaluated until the spring. And so there's, it's not totally concurrent, but we all should have visibility, I think, into what's happening on all different sides. Because, I also think different groups ask for different amounts of money in the race NOFA. I think they ask for different amounts of money here. And if you see someone getting, $250,000 and then asking for another $500,000, then it's kind of like, okay, like what are we doing here? What are the needs that we're serving, and kind of like at what other organizations' expense, especially when you get into some of the bigger dollar amounts. And so I think making sure that we kind of work towards that cross-departmental visibility is important. But then I think also as the race NOFA, this is our inaugural year. There are a lot of kinks to work out, and hopefully year 2 will go a lot smoother. But I think as we kind of get into year 2 and year 3, starting to think about that kind of, what is this for, and how can we target this in a way that is doing something importantly different from what CDCAC is doing. And, whether that's organizations that wouldn't otherwise qualify for, the HUD conditions and criteria, or if it's to say, we want to almost like supplement what we're able to do here. I think that is feedback that this group of people in particular can provide a really good and helpful perspective on. And so I'm super open if you all have thoughts about where you've seen, perhaps like areas where you've wanted to give awards, but people haven't been able to make the right application for it, or places where you're seeing significant need and, a lot of people are asking for money, but there just isn't enough to go or something, those things I think would be helpful for us as we kind of continue to iterate on the other NOFA, since we have more flexibility and control over how that ends up getting used.
We have grappled every year with, should we be focusing on promoting startup ideas versus continuing proven good thing?
Right.
And every year we debate that. And every year we make a little bit of adjustment back and forth, but we've never had a real definitive answer, because both are good. And in my mind, how do we select the very best?
Yeah.
Independent.
Totally. Yeah. Laura, this is your meeting to direct, so.
I was going to say, I was hoping that that's what this evaluation this fall is going to do. There's some questions that keep coming up about the success of grants, about whether we give new proposals, the extra couple of points in our evaluation process.
That perhaps is the most profound thing.
Yeah.
But none of us know what the right answer is.
Right, but hopefully your process this fall will end with I don't know if it will be the right answer, but it will be an answer that we can use for the next couple of years.
Yes, yes.
Because right now, as you say, every year we talk about it, but we don't do anything. So hopefully that's what we'll do. But the timing, of course, as you say, won't really work with the race
Yeah.
grants. But there's always next year,
I was
next
gonna
year,
say,
next
yeah,
year, next year.
I think we plan to continue to iterate and work with United Way on the evaluation of how does year 2 go, and hopefully year 2 is demonstrably better than year 1. But I also see Jennifer online. Your hand just went up.
I do, yeah. Yeah, thank you for coming. This is really helpful. One thing I was sort of curious about is I know the rationale for the way that the race stuff was structured is that some of the applicants wouldn't be eligible for the HUD or the CSBG funding. And I know that was sort of the initial thought, but as it turns out, as somebody mentioned, I think 90% of the organization, or some huge amount of the organizations funded were not only the organizations we fund, but also the same programs. So I just want to say, we also struggle with the capacity piece. So I think part of why the perception that our process is hard is that, we do have to fit into certain priorities, community priorities, but the vast majority of organizations that serve low-income people do fit into that priority. But the other perception is because we have to really look at organizational capacity and compliance. And we take that really seriously. And so that's something we struggle with all the time as far as like the startup organizations. We try to fund startup organizations. We're interested in that. But again, we want to make sure that they, have a functioning board of directors and can submit reports and can do billing and all that kind of stuff. So I think going forward, it would be helpful, I think, if both processes sort of consulted on what, what's eligible and what isn't. And that might help us kind of separate our lanes a little bit. And maybe have a conversation about what we mean by organizational capacity, because I think, the fact that it's county money on the one hand is helpful, but on the other, we also want to be good stewards of that. And this community development fund also has county money, and we kind of hold it to the same standard. So I think going forward, if these two processes could sort of talk about that, like what do we mean by organizations that would not be eligible for ours, or what are some ways we can look at capacity differently so we can better collaborate? I think those are kind of would be good things to think about moving forward.
Chris, yeah.
Because I remember we were having a discussion about this with the committee, that we had noticed that newer programs that were coming into kind of like the purview of the county were getting significant less funding compared to programs that have been here before, right? And I think that I was able to say that the cap was around $30,000. So if you were a newer program, you were not going to be getting 30 more, past the $30,000 mark. And there was a conversation of, should there be a separate process, or should there be a separate, not application, but a way to tell the applicants, if you're newer to the program, don't expect more than this amount because this is what's been given in the past. So is this kind of like, is the Race NOFA kind of the gap between that and saying, if you were a newer program, because I know I work with a lot of nonprofits that are like, we've done programs, I worked with Equanimity Foundation this summer that they did a career talk and gave internships to over 20 students that had never done it before, but they're like, we don't know how to apply to the process. And as I sit on this committee and they ask me, how do I get funding? I'm like, you wouldn't qualify because you don't have everything set up. And they're like, we do good work, right? So how, is this kind of filling in, I guess that's the question, is this filling in that gap? Because there are a lot of new nonprofits that they do good work, they want to continue to do work, but they don't fall under our category of, yes, they're a good organization to receive funding because they're so new and they do need that extra little capital.
Yeah. I think that would be a perfect fit for applying. There's still a lot of evaluation criteria, and there's a different committee of both staff and community members that nonprofit community members who are doing the evaluation of that, but there's still an evaluation and scoring. And but I do think that, especially with the technical assistance sessions and the ability to kind of sit with the people who are ultimately going to review the applications to work through it. And I think, Elizabeth, am I allowed to talk about the upcoming NOFA and the things that you just told me about last week? Or I don't know what's public yet, so. Okay, so I think we're splitting, I think the plan is to split, into have one kind of pathway for larger organizations in the second iteration of the NOFA and one pathway for smaller organizations. And you'd be able to request like a lower maximum dollar for smaller organizations, but it would be a simpler application, that wouldn't ask some of the more complex questions. And that way you kind of, not only are you getting like the technical assistance support, but you're, not being asked to perform at a huge organizational capacity when you are in that more startup phase. And so I would love to see it kind of fill that gap, right? And get people to the point where, like you said, like funding proven good ideas, maybe if they get 1 to 2 years of race NOFA funding, they're in a position where they're really set. They've kind of shown this works and we like it and we want to keep doing it. And then they're in a position to come to the CDBG grant money and say, we can fill this out. We can have a board of directors that we can report to and all of that kind of stuff. So I can see those things. I don't know how many conversations have occurred about kind of creating an intentional pathway in that way. Maybe Elizabeth can or cannot speak to that, but like I can see that working really well longer term.
Keep in mind, the really good projects ought to be able to get other funding and not rely upon.
That's also true. Yeah. I think we've had some conversations about that as well as, and as well as like making sure that if we see something as like a true like core function of the county or the social safety net or things like that, making sure that that is not a grant NOFA process, but really saying like
County staff.
Yeah, if this is a county priority, then it is something we have to do, and we're not gonna say like, oh well, this year maybe you'll get money or this year you won't, but to really move those onto contracts and have recurring processes and formalization of that. So
just a note about the capacity issue that just came up also. I just wanted to note, I don't know if you knew this, or others in the room knew this, but the county used to support a nonprofit capacity building program. And it was before my time, but Jennifer is familiar with it. But either way, it was a great opportunity for smaller organizations who might need help with capacity building and board training and things like that. And I don't know, Jennifer, if it was run through AED or if it was a nonprofit that ran it, but we would refer organizations to that program.
It was actually funded through CDBG, and AED worked with a consultant to do that. So they would work with a cohort of 3 nonprofit organizations each year and really kind of focus the capacity building on what they needed. So it might be board development or fundraising or whatever. And it was great because, again, organizations that might not be ready for big grants or whatever, they were able to help kind of work through some of their capacity stuff.
It's super interesting.
Yeah.
Can I ask, why did it stop?
Jennifer, I have no idea.
We ran out of money. The CDBG grant has not gotten bigger. In fact, it's getting smaller. So it just, actually I say that. And then at one point it switched to county general fund. And then I don't know why it was discontinued at that point.
Yeah.
I think it was a budget issue. I mean, it was a good program.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a federal program. I was a part of AmeriCorps Vista, and that's a federal program that's designated to build capacity for nonprofits. And so, I mean, it would be really interesting to see kind of that federal local partnership, right? And saying like, if you're a newer nonprofit, the county will take half of the money, we'll pay half the money and you guys can pay the other half. Because when I worked, so I did my Vista at AHC, and the interesting thing was that they had applied for a grant from the Virginia Housing Alliance, which is a state program, but no one locally would have told them, hey, this is a program that you can hire a college educated person for a year and they'll do it. And El Futuro has done a fantastic job building through that capacity. So maybe that's something that the county could let their other it is something that is great, and let the other nonprofits know, here's a starter thing. Part of our startup capacity that we can help you with is funding a full-time staff, or giving that, because it's a one-time payment, right? Giving that half the grant or whatever, and you guys can get the other half, but you would get a year-long employee. You know, and the Treasury Department pays that, like, it's just a one-time. It's great. I tell everyone, like, please do it. So, yeah.
I like the idea of this sort of like pathway opportunities for organizations. That makes sense to me. It's not clear to me if, like, it's not laid out in a way that is it that race is a pathway into community development funding? Is it community development funding is a pathway into race that provides larger, more flexible pots of money? Like, neither of which was an intentional choice, right? So to me, it's not quite clear how either of those, whether it's either of those or neither. But it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure whether these two opportunities fit in that way.
Yeah. And I mean, to add like a complicated third way, right? Like you could have a nonprofit that has really good capacity right now and they want to use one side of funding to keep doing what they're already doing so well. And they want to use the other side of funding to try something new and see if they can add to their programs or bring, some new element in or expand their services, And so I think that's where it gets like complicated, right? It's like I would want to encourage like that kind of utilization as well as encourage the startup utilization. I think there's so many different things, but I think you're right about, having some intentional conversations about what is it, again, kind of back to where I started, what is it we're really trying to accomplish here?
And I think to kind of put it kind of bluntly, I think something that would make me feel better about the fact that there are now these two different opportunities is, Jennifer mentioned that the application process and especially the grant monitoring for the community development funding is pretty rigorous, right? Yeah. And I think what would make me feel better is hearing from the race side of things, showing that that getting race funding is an easier application, an easier, easier to receive and administer your grant, which would be fine, but I want to know that it's not at the expense of providing the services and having the rigorous monitoring that we provide. So that would make me feel more flexible.
There is reporting and monitoring requirements. I don't know them personally, but Elizabeth, I don't know if you're able to share a little bit about what that looks like for the race grantees.
And that may not be something that you wouldn't
or later
now.
Yes.
Like to be able to hear that as the process goes forward would make me feel more comfortable.
Yeah, I can briefly go over it. We are collecting. I mean, when we were formulating our reporting requirements, I reached out to other grant programs. So like I talked to Caitlin and I talked to people in DHS who are running grant programs, and we kind of tried to take ideas from everyone. So like a lot of the financial reporting is very similar for the race grant that it is for your grant, as far as the backup documentation that we're looking at. And then we are looking at like demographic data that is similar to what's collected in your grants and DHS grants. And then we are focused on, we have the organizations form SMART goals. So we kind of like work with them to develop SMART goals. And then we just ask them to report, like give an update on the SMART goals. And then at the end of the process, to tie it back to this, like, again, our equity focus, we have them reflect on the, like, not only describe the broad impact of their proposal and how it played out over the grant period, but also to examine it with the equity lens that the county uses. So like who benefited, who is burdened, who's missing, how did we know that, and what can we do about it? How can we improve upon it now? So that is a broad overview of our reporting.
I mean, I think I'm glad to see that Elizabeth is here and Jennifer and Caitlin are like, I think making sure that we have more of these kind of convening spaces so that, you know, everyone can share these concerns, but also like, I think good ideas and suggestions and, you know, the race NOFA is going to continue to be iterated upon. And so as we hear feedback from you all and other groups as well, being able to like really thoughtfully incorporate that is important to me. And I think, you know, will help us continue to get better as we go. But I think it's just kind of, for now, you know, a process. And I came into this very late in the first round. So I think I feel already better about how the second round is going to go, just based on the changes that we've made this summer. And so, but I agree that there's still some room for getting on the same page here.
And I think our conversations as we dive into how we might change our process, we'll want to keep that in mind. And
Totally.
how this funding fits into funding, and that'll be that.
I think that would, yeah.
Anything else we want to make sure Maureen hears about our thoughts?
I just wanted to make a comment because when the race NOFA came out, and you guys awarded this year, right? Like it was awarded it earlier.
The FY25 budget, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Because I remember I was like seeing so many different things of so many different awards. But I want to say, because one of the concerns that I know I was having was, since this is a lot of the same programs we're evaluating, we were worried that the larger programs were going to benefit more than the smaller, right, organizations. And I was surprised, but I was very happy that you all had awarded it accordingly and like helped out the smaller organizations, that they really did need that kick up, that maybe the application process that they went through us wasn't perfect, but they were able to go through that and get funding, which was able to fund those programs. So I think that calmed a lot of my anxiety down about this. And so I just want to say thank you, because I think that was a really big, like, wow, like it worked, you know, like, okay, this is great. So yeah.
I appreciate that. I'm sure Elizabeth appreciates that. She's
Yes.
been a warrior through all of this. Warrior and worrier. Taylor Swift both. But you know, I think, yeah, I think that, and now splitting as well the kind of process in the awards to make sure that we really are giving smaller organizations a real home to figure their stuff out. You know, I expect to see even more of that probably in the second round.
Can I ask, would there be any feedback from the county board on what they think we should be doing? I mean, we're coming up with recommendations and sending them up. Like, for example, is the county board going to say, you know, we'd really rather have you, you know, don't keep it at 30 or 50,000. If it's worth 200,000, give them 200,000.
And I don't know that the county board has had a conversation about expectations on CDCAC or CDCAC. I know I've talked with Matt DeFerranti, who is the past liaison to the commission, a bit about it. And we met with HUD a lifetime ago now to talk about some of the challenges that staff and Arlington broadly have had in terms of implementing things. But I don't know that we've had kind of more of a strategic directional conversation, if that makes sense. If that is something that you all are interested in getting from the board, maybe that's something that we can include in part of this evaluation process. But I don't anticipate anyone getting y'all's recommendations and being like, no, I don't think so. You know, I think that that's highly unlikely, especially if, you know, you go through this whole process and have the surveys and the focus groups and the, you know, the concerted evaluation that I'm sure that you'll have. If you were just like, we just feel like it should be 20,000 instead of 50,000, like, I think maybe we'd be like, I don't know, but I think Caitlin would say that long before it got to us. So, you know, I think I wouldn't be too worried about that, but if it's something that you're interested in having from us, I think I am happy to wrangle my colleagues into getting some thoughts and feedback and information for you.
I'd be afraid to ask, but I was just wondering. It always seemed to be one way. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But certainly, isn't that our role, is to go out, to gather information and data, to formulate a recommendation? To give it to staff can take it to the elected officials, and the elected officials can say, what were they thinking? Or they can say, that's the most brilliant thing. Why didn't we think about this?
Definitely
You
the
know,
second, always.
But then they also have access, right? And buried in a staff report or something somewhere that shows the data, that shows the questions that we ask people, that provides them with what we based our recommendation on. And so that just makes it much easier for them, as opposed to going in cold and saying, hey, what do you guys think? Because, right, they're thinking about 10,000 different things, and they may get a little off track if we just ask them an open-ended question.
Oh, I wouldn't want. No, it was just,
No.
Yeah,
it seems almost like a rubber stamp, and I just want to make sure we're doing what we should be doing.
I definitely hear where you're coming from, and I think what you're saying is definitely my mindset, but I also understand where it feels like, well, we want to have buy-in and we want to make sure that, you know, the ultimate people who have to sign off on this are good with it. And we haven't, like I said, we haven't decided liaisons for next year yet, but if it makes sense, it sounded like talking about preliminary recommendations of how you might change things at the May meeting next year. I might recommend having your board liaison, whether that's hopefully me or someone else, be there, right? And then if you all are talking about preliminary recommendations that are like somehow wildly out of line with where your liaison thinks the board might be at, then like that way they're in the room to be able to kind of voice that in that moment before you get to final recommendations. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that also gives, you know, the liaison the opportunity to go back to the board in between May and June and say, hey, you know, CDCAC is thinking this, and I think that's a good idea, or would we have concerns about that, or whatever the reaction to your preliminary recommendations might be, so that, you know, we can get some feedback before, you know, you all have come to a 100% conclusion on what the right moves are.
I understand the desire to optimize the allocation of discretionary funds. CDCAC has a long history. And I think we're interested in perfecting our approach. But I'm not really seeing that here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think this process that we're gonna go through with kind of evaluating what we do, if we can sort of pick a direction and sort of strengthen that, I think we'll feel more confident in our approach and being able to explain to you guys why we made the recommendations that we did.
Yeah.
And I think that will make us feel better, right? Because we said it earlier, we kind
So
of took it a little and we took it back.
our task is to justify rather than perfect.
Well,
no, our task is to gather data, right? Create some
Yeah.
recommendations, and then hopefully from that we perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
well, I know we have a couple of other things
Yeah.
to do tonight,
Okay.
but
I appreciate all this discussion, guys. Seriously, it really it means a lot to have some people so engaged and knowledgeable, but also, you know, working to push us to be even better. And so reach out. I'll probably stay for the rest of the meeting, but like reach out anytime, and you know, you all should have our contact info pretty easily. So anything else that you didn't have a chance to discuss here, if you want to reach out, I'll be available.
thank you for your
Good.
time, for sharing your thoughts. And
Very helpful.
next up, I think we send it over to Caitlin to talk about the cake.
I'm actually gonna pass it to
Oh.
Jennifer. Otherwise I'd be doing too much talking. But Jennifer's gonna talk through our consolidated annual performance and evaluation report, which is the annual report we submit to HUD every year. So Jennifer, did you want me to share my screen, or you got it? Okay.
I got it. Can y'all see? Should I
Yeah,
make it a little bit bigger? And I think you got that in your mailing as well, if it's easier for you to pull it up. So I was going to ask a quiz question. Does anybody know what CAPER stands for? But Caitlin already told you. So this is the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, which is required by HUD for the CDBG, but we also kind of roll that up and use that to do all of our reporting. So also for our CSBG and our AHIF funding. So this is really our annual report for Community Development Fund. What I can't remember if you guys got the entire, there's a bunch of narratives that have to go to HUD. It's like 120 pages. If you didn't get that, that's online. So that really describes in a lot of detail, specifically the CDBG stuff. But because people don't want to go through that all, we create the citizen summary every year. So I'm just going to walk through it. And it's open for public review until September 18th. So it is still in draft. We're still looking for feedback, and then we'll be submitting it to HUD at the end of September. So as I said, the CAPER reports on activities for CDBG, the Home Investment Partnerships Program, which we mostly use for affordable housing development, Community Services Block Grant, the Community Services Block Grant, TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. Excuse me, I'm dropping my phone. And also the Affordable Housing Investment Fund, the local funding housing services set aside. So here's the expenditure summary for the year. I can walk through it. So we spent a little over 1.3 million on CDBG for programming, 457,000 for planning and admin, which is predominantly staff. Home 79,000, which is also predominantly staff. A little over 300,000 for community services block grant, and almost 300,000 for AHIF. So that was the total spent for this year, a little bit less than 2.5 million. So we funded 44 programs using a combination of all of these funds. We always track volunteer hours. So all of the programs that are funded, the volunteer hours were valued at approximately $775,000, which is great. We also asked subrecipients to report on leverage. So they leverage more than 12.5 million in addition to the grant. So that's, what is it, a 6-to-1 leverage or something like that. The citizen summary also talk a little bit about what's next in 2025. I will skip through that. So here's the fun one. This is the table. And let me see, can you all see?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So sometimes we go through line by line, but I thought rather than do that, you all can read this. I would talk about some of there's some funky numbers this year. So I just wanted to there's some very low and some very high numbers. So I thought I would preempt your questions and kind of talk about those to the extent we know what those numbers are. And if you have additional questions, we can do that. So first, this is organized by the goals of the consolidated plan. So goal 1 is affordable housing, developing and preserving affordable housing. So there's these 4 strategies. Within them, we did not use any funding for affordable housing development using CDBG or home this year. The rehabilitation or repair was Eco Action Arlington and Rebuilding Together. Rebuilding Together had 2 programs, if you remember. One was their typical home repair for homeowners. And then they also are piloting something that's a rehab program for low-income renters. So they pretty much met their goals for both of those. The MyPAP program, the Moderate Income Purchase Assistance Program, 9 households became first-time homebuyers getting a MyPAP loan, and using and Achieve Your Dream, which does counseling and also helps people access funding. 14 households became first-time homebuyers. So the employment and training programs, we fund 5 different ones. So I won't go through all of them. I did want to highlight, so the Arlington Employment Center training program, you'll notice the goal was to have 20 people employed and they only did 8 employed. The reason for that was because they really changed their model in the past year. So they were looking at higher barrier clients, so more ESL folks, more folks who are having other challenges with employment, and they also had some staffing changes. So they're trying to set that up. They've changed their model some, so we are hoping that will increase next year. La Cocina, as you can see, was intending to employ 54 people and employed 17. The reason for that, this is kind of interesting, that their main culinary arts program was baking, and it turns out that baking is not as people aren't hiring bakers as much now, and I don't know why that is, if people stay longer or something like that. So they're kind of shifting what programs they're offering. Also, some of their cohorts just graduated at the end of the year and are seeking employment. So they think that those numbers will go up. Unfortunately, the way that we track is the end of the fiscal year, so that's what we can see. Melwood Jobs pretty much met their thing. NVFS Training Futures also intended to employ 17 people and ended up employing 3. And the reason for that is that, again, the cohorts are sort of recently concluded, so more people are looking now. They also said more of their participants this year are already employed. They either will take people who are not employed or underemployed. So the folks that are employed, they said really have not had time to focus on job searching as much, but they will continue to track them. I think that's all I wanted to highlight on the, should I stop after each section or should I just keep going? How do y'all want to do this?
Keep going.
Okay, all right. Okay, so under the micro enterprise development, so if you remember, those are the ones that are focused on loans to small businesses and sorry, I'm going back and forth. I lost where I was. So those all, came pretty close to their goals. And one thing I want to say about the goals too is because of the timing, so the goals that we put initially in the action plan in April may get adjusted later in the year as we're developing agreements, because what we put in the action plan is sort of what they proposed. And then we end up kind of negotiating. They might have different funding sources. So by the time the agreements are actually completed in June, some of these may shift a little bit. So that's also partly why we have discrepancies sometimes. All right, so reducing barriers to unemployment, we have lots under that. AHC had its Serrano Resident Services Program. This was the first year of it. They were really able to do more outreach than they thought, so they were able to assist more people than they had anticipated. Similarly, with the Terwilliger Place Resident Services with APA. And we find the resident services programs that we fund tend to really underestimate their clients served. They all do a bunch of stuff. So what they apply for may be eviction prevention or job training or computer training or youth services, and they tend to kind of put in the lower amounts and then do better. So that's a lot of times what we see with the resident services program. The Arlington Thrive Child Care Outreach Coordinator did way more than they were planning to, and they didn't actually explain why. Yes, they did. They received a foundation grant and a private business donation. So this was a program that actually was initially seed money. Arlington Thrive came into us, if you guys will remember, and wanted to kind of look at the affordable childcare issue. So this was like the first amount of money that they had gotten. They were able to receive additional money, so they were able to do more than they had anticipated. IUTA had fewer clients come in. Bugatti ended up just assisting more people. They did more workshops than they had anticipated. Wesley is hugely much more, again, because it's the resident services programs tend to underestimate. Also, they ended up receiving an AHIF grant, which is typically a larger amount. So if you remember, it's a 2-year grant, but you're not eligible. So it's a larger amount. So they were able to assist more people than they had anticipated initially. All right, so reducing barriers to equitable access to digital technology.
Jennifer, I have just a quick question, before I forget it.
Sure.
And I think I know the answer to this question, but for those, programs that are serving considerably fewer, particularly if, it's fewer come in or, it's a matter of, fewer are participating in the program because there's just, nobody does baking anymore or whatever. Are they using less of the grants or are they still using the same amount of the grant because it was for a staff person and that staff person is still, needing their salary paid?
I would say 90% of the time it's the latter because we are paying for staff. We had a couple organizations that didn't bill much or anything this year. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head which ones those are. Just as a reminder too, as you all are reviewing next year's proposals, you will get a last year's report for ongoing subrecipients. So it will include this number. It will also include the expenditure amount and their final report, sort of the narrative piece and the staff analysis of that. So as this will all come back to you as you're reviewing next year's. And I would certainly encourage you to ask, like, you didn't do great last year. How are you planning to change your model? Hopefully they would address that in the proposal. But that's certainly something we can ask.
So I was just for the question about, I know a couple of the organizations that didn't bill as much. And so like one of them was the Arlington Retirement Housing Corporation Technology Training and Support Program. They actually assisted more than they were going to, but what wound up happening was they relied on volunteers much more than they were assisting.
Right.
They couldn't find costs to bill us. And so we were like, okay.
Which is why we didn't spend the whole AHIP amount. Yeah.
And then another one was Melwood. They weren't able to serve as many people, but they also, they didn't bill us for the full amount because of that. So I think it really depends.
No, I was just curious, and it's more that this is something to keep in mind as we're reviewing, particularly because we do want to see some of these, definitely address a model of, like La Cucina, if there's a shift in sort of the industry, we want to see that they are shifting along with it.
Yeah.
So.
I have a
Definitely.
question. This evaluation, is it based only on Arlington residents who have been assisted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what the grant is for. So many of them serve other jurisdictions, but the grant is for them to serve Arlington residents.
Okay.
Because theoretically, our CDBG funding is supposed to be
For Arlington, yeah.
All, and the CDBG, the CSBG, and the AHIP is all for Arlington residents. So, yeah. And many of these organizations are Arlington based. So that's all who they serve. Other ones are more Northern Virginia or DC, but we just fund them for our piece.
Right.
All right. So ARHC, Caitlin mentioned they used a lot of volunteers. They were able to assist more folks. Gonna keep going. Arm in Arm, that was a new program, so it took them a while to get up and staffed, so they didn't enroll as many as they had hoped. Aspire just keeps growing. They have more money and more kids that need them. Bridges to Independence didn't really explain why they were able to serve more folks than they had anticipated. Rhoda, do you have any insights in that?
I think it's just a matter of how they counted and the services that they provided and that they reported on. It's, it's a combination of things such as, food assistance and a combination of other things in here. They also did not spend their funding and they had difficulty with staffing.
Mm-hmm.
Someone was hired and the person did not stay. They were fired, and so they carried on with their existing staff. So they did not use their funding this year actually, but their numbers do show that they provided service. But
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. So Buckingham Youth Brigade did great this year, and part of the reason was, I don't know if y'all remember, but last year we had one-time funding that we used to distribute informational materials to all committed affordable units in the county, or most of them. We went to like 9,500 units, and we actually contracted with the Buckingham Youth Brigade kids to do a lot of that, which is cool. It was, and in their report you can read it. They had a great experience. They got to learn about different complexes and, go around Arlington. But so they engaged a lot more kids in that piece of the work. So hopefully they'll continue to have a lot of people engaged. Edu Futuro, just again, they're growing. They got a huge grant from the Race NOFA, so I think they'll continue to grow. Liberty's Promise was interesting. So their numbers are usually pretty high. They were low this year. And the reason why they said was because typically they've recruited a lot of their kids from ESL classes or English as a second language classes, and they just for whatever reason they were not able to get as many kids, and there weren't as many kids enrolled in that. If you remember, they worked mostly at Wakefield High School. They also said a lot of the kids dropped out in the spring because they had other commitments, which is, none of the other youth programs have said that. So I think we'll want to ask them about kind of their model too next year. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
Keep going. All right. So supporting increased access to health and community resources, the Arlington Neighborhood Village Senior Ambassador Program. The reason why that number is so much huger is because in the action plan, what we had anticipated as our number was that 25 people would be recruited as volunteer ambassadors to go out into the community and share information on services, which was actually not correct. Those are actually not the beneficiaries. The correct beneficiaries are the people that they're helping. So the people that they connected to services, the people who were able to get sort of the free enrollment in Neighborhood Village. So that's, they did really well this year. The APRA Resident Services Expanded Hours pilot, again, served way more people than they had anticipated. They were able to do a lot more programming than they thought. They did more food distribution, which they hadn't really done. They did more senior services. So a lot of things that they were kind of looking to do, they were able to really expand their programming. What else did I want to highlight? Our Stomping Ground did really well. They were planning to assist 50 and assisted 100. The reason for that was because they were able to get additional funding, which is great. They're an example of a small growing organization that I think we were one of the first organizations to fund them in Arlington, and they're doing great. They're able to bring in other funding sources. They're expanding through Northern Virginia, so I think they're a success.
That's a question.
I don't see clothesline on here.
They just started getting funding this year,
Okay.
2025.
So
it
they'll get
started,
the report. Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll be in 2025. So everything else is sort of in line. So those were kind of the ones I wanted to highlight, and happy to talk about any other ones if y'all have questions.
I had a question. So I guess this is kind of our snapshot into the needs of Arlington County based on what's assisted, and I'm glad Maureen's here as well to say, because I don't want the idea to be like, oh, well, they were able to do so much with their funding. It's that, no, they might need more funding because there's more people that need to be serviced. When I see Wesley Housing and all the other people, I mean, that's hundreds of percentage more than what they were expecting, which also means there's hundreds of percent more need in the county than what we anticipated or what even they anticipated. So I just wanted to put that out there because that's kind of shocking. It's great that they were able to do it, but it's kind of like, whoa, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. But again, like we struggle with this. It depends on how they count, right? So different organizations might. So for when like a resident services program may count. Somebody came and they offered a brochure, and that they count that as touching a resident, as opposed to a resident that they helped him get a job, which is a very different level of intervention. And we don't really get into the weeds on that. I mean, we do. That's not true. We do get more granular, as you all know, in the performance measures for each one. But when you're looking at the big numbers, yeah, they can be huge. But if you dig a little deeper, it might be okay. They got a brochure, and we sat down with them and helped them fill out a benefits form or whatever. So.
Yeah.
But the way HUD wants us to report is number of people touched, which, as program people sort of hurts us because we're like, but what about the outcomes? What about like how lives are better? Which is, we also try to look at that. But part of what we report to our funders is the widget. So that's part of what this is as well.
and I'll just remind everyone that when we start our Q&A sessions in October, one of the handouts that you'll get each week for each continuing organization received funding in the past, you'll get a snapshot of their final report from last year. So it'll have an expanded set of information than what you're seeing here. So more about performance. Do we do a write-up that kind of explains how they did and kind of some of the challenges they had and some of our observations. So you'll get a little bit more flavor.
And if you really care, I mean, you can read, they submit final reports in Zoom grants, as well as that we ask them for the fourth quarter to upload a narrative report, which is where we get a lot of this information. So you can, if you care, you can read that. I mean, they tend to be longer, and we tend to kind of edit them as we put them into the final report, but that's available as well if you're interested.
I was gonna ask, is there a way to kind of, I hate to do it, but like put like the star student and say like, here's some programs that we as the county evaluated that we think have done phenomenally well, to see if other organizations could not copy, but like twist it in their own way. I'm thinking of like Aspire and El Futuro as education programs, right? Like, did they do something that was, changing that others might be able to attach onto, but they don't know what they did, Like I can tell you, and I keep going back to the Futuro, but like they hired a lot more AmeriCorps this year, so they were going to be able to build more capacity. Aspire was able to do the same thing. And so like maybe they can mentor or not just that, or just get that information from us and say, we did this, like maybe this is something that you guys can do too.
So in the past, we used to actually occasionally convene like cohorts, so like all of the youth programs, just for that purpose. And it was really helpful and people loved it. And then, I don't know, COVID hit. I don't know, we've kind of stopped. But I agree because I think, there are peer learning opportunities that many of them do anyway, if they're part of the safety net group that meets regularly, or there's, the Arlington Partnership for Children and Families. So those groups. So some of those there are kind of natural connections, but I think it's a great idea for ones that maybe there aren't, or maybe we can be more intentional, like, share your best practices stuff. I think that's always helpful.
I was also just going to say, in terms of highlighting organizations, that's kind of one of the things we try to do on the bus tour too.
Mhm.
Is really
Yes.
just promoting organizations that we think are doing a great job. And
Yes.
great, we are running short on time. So are there any other questions on the keeper? Okay.
Thanks. And again, you have till the 18th. If you want to look at it and you have questions or comments, please let us know.
So I can just move right into the next.
Let's talk about what comes next.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to do this quickly, but also keeping in mind that we do have some members that haven't been through this process before. So if it doesn't, if you have questions, those who have not been through this process before, and you need some more in-depth assistance with how to access and use them, just let me know and we can do that offline. Okay, so just a quick reminder for proposal review schedule. So proposals are due on September 6th. So that's this Friday. We're hoping to have applications available for your review on September 20th, which is a Friday. And at that time, you'll also get the schedule. So who we're going to be meeting with each Wednesday in October. So there are 5 Wednesdays in October, the 2nd, 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th. We're going to try to consolidate everything into 4 nights, but it just depends on the number of applications that we get. This last few years, we've had to expand to 5 nights. So I did just put an asterisk there that we might need to call you back on the 30th, but we'll try really hard to not. But either way.
Well, except I will say that once you get over like 2.5 hours.
I know, it does, I know, your eyes start
to numb. There is a tipping.
There's no lie.
Yeah.
There is a tipping point.
Well, yeah, so we're gonna try to not keep you past tonight, which is still very. Okay, so we're, with that said, depending on how many nights of review we have, we'll either meet on the November 6th or December 4th for dot night, which is when we do our ranking. And that'll be virtual. So that's to be determined. And then the budget proposal review will be in March of next year. So that's just kind of when you'll see the program recommendations. As far as the weekly schedule, we're asking that, for those who've done this before and then everyone who's new, we like to see questions from CDCAC in advance, and that's just because we share those with the applicants before the Q&A sessions. So try to get your questions in through Zoom Grants by Monday at noon. There's a section in Zoom Grants called like committee notes or something like that. Enter your questions there. You can also email them to me. That's easier for you. And then we just we go through the questions and we consolidate them and send them over to applicants each week. Some of the questions that we send to applicants we'll ask them to address during their presentation. But we'll also be asking them to submit them in writing. So they'll be entered directly into Zoom Grants for you to review. And then some of the questions that we submit, sometimes if it's like about their budget or a cost allocation, we'll just ask for that in writing. We won't have them cover it during the Q&A session. Again, you'll be reviewing final reports and summary sheets. Those should be ready for you each Tuesday afternoon. And then we'll email those to you Wednesday mornings directly. So you'll get an email with the final summary sheets and final reports in your email.
We've talked about the presentation and different ways of handling it. What are the applicants being told about the presentation? We had talked about asking them not to present, but to just highlight one or two things and not to go 14 or 15 minutes repeating
I
things.
feel like there was, we didn't feel like there was quite consensus from the committee on sort of exactly what they should be talking about. Because we got some, feedback that they should just be answering questions, and then others, but there are others that sort of like having the sort of more formal presentation. So, we're gonna try to give them the feedback that, they should be really focusing on elements outside of what's already in their application. They shouldn't be, reciting what's in there. The folks follow that, I can't.
Considering equity, like, isn't it inequitable that you have children and this group doesn't, and that you're really good at presenting? You're not, like.
Yeah. And that goes to what do you want us to know that you couldn't put in the application?
Right.
Because we read what you wrote.
Yeah.
I mean, we can ask them not to bring beneficiaries if everyone agrees that that's what we should do. I'm fine with that. I didn't think there was consensus on that, but if there is, tell me now, and we can share that feedback. What do people think?
How many folks last year did that? How many programs actually brought?
I would say
Like less than half.
I would say there was only a handful. I mean,
I was
maybe
gonna
10.
say
Yeah.
I would say 2 or 3. It was not a lot.
That's a lot.
I think it was more than 2 or 3, but
A lot of the
it
youth
was definitely
programs do
not
that.
the majority.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. I know youth did it. Edu Futuro brought the one who was the student.
I mean, most of
With-
the education ones.
They
Oh,
were.
it's
were heavy on
Yeah.
those. Yeah.
Remind me, we're meeting in person.
We
and
are
they're
meeting in
virtual.
person.
With them in person?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was just thinking that was really elongated.
That's because they were virtual.
So what do people think? We want to encourage.
I didn't object so much to that. Mine was more of an objection to just having them spend 15 minutes reiterating,
The application.
what their organization is and, who they are and everything that we already know.
I'm always a positive person. I'm always like in the highlights. What are the highlights that you can give me of what you guys have done, And then we can decide, oh, the highlights are good or they're not good enough.
Yeah,
I would go with the not repeating what's in the application.
Yeah, I mean, that's
That's
consistently
just-
been
That was
offered
what
as.
mine was. It's just like, we can read it.
Yes, and that is consistently, that's in the NOFA, we send that in the email to them. Do not recite what's in your application, try to expand on it, talk about more about sort of what your intended outcomes are, the goals you're trying to meet. That's,
Only do what you can do.
yeah.
Stories are helpful, even if the beneficiaries are there or not, so like, I'm not opposed to beneficiaries.
So what do we do? Maybe this is something that can be, considered through the evaluation, that's.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I just want to know for this year, what they're told,
Yeah.
whatever they're told for this year, whatever it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, believe me, we'll include what we just talked about, don't recite application, include stories, talking about the impact you're hoping to have.
Impact and goals.
What's that?
The impact and goals, what you were talking about. Yeah, because that's what we want to see.
Yeah.
And is it fair to let them know that the presentation has very little to do with the final evaluation? I mean, they shouldn't freak about the presentation and try to, because there were some presentations that were quite professional and splashy, great, wonderful, but it didn't really add.
What word did we use when we're to invite them to come here? Did we
Q&A
use the-
session is what we're calling
What was it?
Q&A session.
Q&A session. Okay, I think that helps. By calling it a presentation, we're
Yeah.
telling them, give us your PowerPoint, walk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, the other option is we don't have to send your questions in advance. We could keep them for the, the night of, so that, I mean, it's nice for them to be able to prepare and provide a written
Yeah.
response. But if you think there are questions that would be better in sort of a conversational format, maybe just keep them to yourself if you want. I'm just going off of some ideas to make it more conversational.
And I don't think we should keep it to ourselves and spring it on them at the meeting.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Perhaps we send them the questions and say, at the meeting, please answer these couple of questions.
Yeah,
Except for the technical things that you say about allocations, you can do that.
yeah. I think particularly because if they're, if they have to do with some of their numbers or whatever, they have to look some of them up.
Yeah.
So,
Some people are better at answering questions than doing presentation. They can have all information, but when it comes to presenting, they just go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's, yeah.
very true.
Yeah, I mean, when we reach out to them, we differentiate the ones that we want them to include in the presentation are more the programmatic ones. And then the budget ones, usually we just have them submit in writing because it's sort of tedious to talk about. And this person's salary is this and that. So, hopefully that you can at least go back into Zoom grants and check.
yeah.
All right, so I'm just going to quickly move on to just in terms of subject matter experts. We have been asking staff from various parts of the county that kind of are, familiar with either the organization or program to review and provide comments on the application. Again, this year, we're going to try to get multiple reviewers per application if we can. No more than 3 per application, and those will be added to the summary sheet. And you'll get the context of the reviewer's area of expertise in that review. So
Those are phenomenal.
yeah, we find them to be helpful. So again, we just kind of talked about this. Maybe we're going to give them a little bit more context as to what we just talked about, but they'll have 15 minutes total. We'll be timing them. They'll be asked to answer questions, and hopefully they will follow the instructions that they're given. So we're going to be doing all review sessions in person because of our quorum rules. You guys are required to participate in person, unfortunately. We're going to be mostly in this room. I'm still trying to figure out the space for the 16th, or we might be upstairs, the 17th. But there's limited space on that night for some reason. Another reminder: if you can't score all of the applications, don't score any because it skews the final averages. So just keep that in mind. Try to stay consistent in how you're reviewing. In terms of what you're looking for in each application, just because otherwise that can kind of skew things. And again, you're welcome to submit your questions in advance, but it is not required, but we do encourage it. The applicants are prepared. I wanted to point out that the evaluation criteria is different this year. Based on our conversation in May, we kind of reorganized the application. We redid the evaluation criteria to better match the narrative request. So each narrative kind of matches to each section now. So you won't have to hopefully you won't have to jump around in the application.
Good.
Just note that there are 2 sections, community needs and overall program design, that can go up to 15 points now. And so you have some more sort of range to play with there. So we're asking about needs and program design up front, then gets directly into organizational capacity and experience, then goes into goals, outcomes, evaluation plan, or long-term strategy, and then sort of budget. Also just note that the leverage score, there's a reviewer score, so your score, and then there's a admin sort of staff score. We have a formula that we use. And then also just keep in mind that you can provide points for the letters of support that or lack thereof, because sometimes applicants don't submit those.
Is that new to this year, the letters of support score? No, we had that last year.
Can I ask where we landed on the sustainability? Was that future funding or organizational capacity? Because we discussed it, and I just don't remember where we ended up.
Yeah, it's kind of both, I think. So let me just. We have long-term strat. So long-term strategy is describe the long-term strategy or plan for your project in meeting your intended program goals. So how do you intend to address your unmet needs over the long term? And then there's program sustainability. So that's more sort of how do you intend to become sort of financially self-sufficient? Like, you know, if this funding didn't exist, what would you do? So hopefully that we'll get two different answers there from applicants, but never know. Okay, so I did want to quickly just remind everyone how to just get into grants. And you're gonna have to bear with me for a second because I don't remember my password and I'm locked out. So when you log in, okay. Okay, so when you log in, this is the screen you're going to see. You're going to see all the open programs first. So it's good. This is the only open program. So you're going to click into fiscal year 2026. Keep in mind that this is going to look a lot different because there's going to actually be applications that have been submitted. You're going to see it's going to be you'll see all the applications organized by night. So each review night. And then so you can click into the various applications by going into the next tab. So where it says applications. So click on that. You'll be able to filter by presentation night here. The dates will be updated, of course. These are not correct right here. And then you can also filter by category. And then source won't be active just because they don't have a source yet. So we'll be able to do that. When you click into the application, you'll be navigating to each of the various areas by these tabs. So this first screen just kind of shows, the basic contact information for the organization. It'll have the presentation date and time on this side, and the category listed here as well. When you go to the next tab, this is the where you'll see the narratives. So it'll you can kind of review all the narrative responses here. And then the next tab is the budget. So that they'll be asked to both provide the request as well as the other sources that they have secured for the program, and then a narrative that kind of describes what that request is and how the other sources they are applying for are. In the evaluation form section, they'll be asked to add how they plan to measure performance of the grant program. They're given several opportunities to add, different performance indicators here. the expected outcomes will be in this first column here. In the next section, that's the documents. So the only required documents are the nonprofit tax exempt status, articles of incorporation, Form 990, and their bylaw or their organizational budget. All the other documents are optional. And the reason we ask for some of these other ones is just to make sure that they're, they are tax exempt organization. And then we're also, we ask for their organizational budget and their Form 990 just to see sort of what their financials are looking like from previous years. I think that was a request from a previous year. So I think that's pretty much it. I did want to just note how you're actually going to be scoring the applications. So if you go into reviewer tools, that button right there, it's going to bring up the score sheet. So the score sheet is going to be here on this left side. And so when you are reviewing the application, it actually has this great split screen feature where you can look at the narratives on the right-hand side and kind of scroll down, and then also look at the score sheet on the left. So you can be reviewing the community needs section and you can say, okay, yeah, I think that deserves a 10 or something. And then you look at the proposal program design and you can say, okay, yeah, that looks like it's a 7. Keep in mind that, again, these first two categories do go up to 15 points now. So you have that range. They were both 10 points before. So just keep that in mind. The only thing that is not in this section when you're in your score sheet is, I believe, it's the letters of support. So the place you have to go for the letters of support is in the, oops, sorry. That's the wrong, oh no. How do we get back to? Oh no, what did I do? How do I get back? Okay, yeah, here we go. Back to full application. It's in the documents section. So under letters of support right here, they can upload 3 letters of support. So that's where those items will be located. Otherwise, everything else is in the narrative section and then the budget tab. And so you can kind of review everything here. The budget is included in here, and then I think the narrative as well. When you're submitting questions, make sure you put your questions in this My Committee Review and Scoring Comments section. Try not to put it in your My Private Notes section because I won't be able to see that information. You can take notes on the application here, but don't put your questions there because I won't be able to look at those.
So are my private notes really private notes, or are they subject to public records request?
So that's, yeah, I mean, they would be subject to, they I would presumably be foiable, but yeah, I would. So, I mean, it's up to you. But make sure you're keeping the questions that you want to submit to the applicants in this section here.
Okay.
But yeah, I wouldn't be able to see these.
Remind me the equation for the staff calculated leverage for.
Yes. It's total program budget. So if we go up to here. Total program budget minus their community development fund request divided by the total. And if they're 90% to 100% is funded by sources other than the community development fund, they get a 5, and then it kind of goes down to 50 to 59 to 60%, and they get a 1, and then anything below 50% is a 0.
So it's the portion of the total not funded by us.
Yes.
Yeah. And then what we score for leverage, we can either use a similar thought process, or we could adjust that based on some factor that we think is important.
Right. Yeah. Like maybe they put in their narrative, well, we didn't include this source because we don't have a firm commitment yet, but we're applying for all these other things. And you say, well, they're really trying. So you can give them, I mean, that's your discretion. You're welcome to interpret that however you want. I did want to also note that up here, if you want to print your application, there's a screen here where you can click print preview. And that'll kind of make a nice kind of printout for you. Some people like to print their applications, and that's totally fine. So just keep that in mind if this is like a more accessible way to review applications on the actual piece of paper. Any questions?
For the email, when you log in,
Oh, yeah.
have you preloaded emails?
Yeah, so we are, so for newer members, we're adding you into the system. My colleague Zena will be emailing you just with a very basic password for you to log in, and it'll have instructions of how to change that password.
Okay.
To something that is, a little bit more private, personal, whatever. But yeah, so you don't need to worry about getting yourself set up or add you into the system.
Okay.
There's a forgot password button.
That's right.
Last year.
So generally, how many of these are there?
We usually get between 35 and 40 applications each year.
Do people generally do you review them by week or, yeah, okay.
I try to do the ones for that week.
Yeah.
More than 30.
Yeah.
Going out one night.
It's been going out.
And they also try to schedule them by subject matter. So all the
Yeah.
youth ones would be on one night, all
Okay.
the others would be on. So it kind
Okay,
of makes it easier. to
yes, yes.
compare.
Okay, great, great. Good to know. Thank you.
45.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
15.
Just so you're not.
It's
so there are traditionally people in the group who are hard graders and people in the group who are traditionally easy graders?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look at me.
Well, all we ask is that you be consistent in the way that you grade. And that's why Caitlin asked if you can only grade some, don't do any, because it really does end up skewing.
Understand.
If you guys have any questions between now and when you get the application, or even after you get them, about give me a call, send me an email.
Get food?
Actually,
We did in the past.
Well.
Of course.
we haven't even talked about that yet. So we're gonna try to figure out.
Priorities.
Try to figure out.
Well, that's actually a good question. Would folks eat food if we had it?
Yeah.
At least sugar and caffeine.
Right? It's a lot.
Started at 9 o'clock, yeah.
So that's
Yes.
another thing.
Pizza's great. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Beautiful,
We're
yeah.
spending a lot more time with you guys next.
And we just really do appreciate you guys and your commitment during October. It is a big lift, and you guys are volunteers, and we just are really grateful for all the work you guys do. So thank you so much for.
Well, it's a big lift for staff.
Yes.
Very big lift for staff.
But we
get paid. You guys don't.
That doesn't.
We get the big bucks, right?
Compensate, so.
I'm sorry, can I make a quick, I know everyone's ready to leave. I have a quick announcement. So HUD reached out to us, as you all know, it's the 50th anniversary of the Community Development Block Grant Program. And they asked us to whip up a virtual CDBG celebration for Arlington. So we're going to do something September 23rd, I think, from 4 to 5, and we're going to be highlighting a couple of beneficiaries. So you guys are welcome once we have our act together. A little bit happy to send out an invitation. So I just wanted to share that. We invite them to our tour every year, and then they don't come, and then they want us to invent one for them, which is fine. But maybe they'll be so excited they'll come on our tour next year.
Jennifer, repeat the date one more time.
September 23rd, it's a Monday and it's from 4 to 5.
All right. Do we have the chair's report? I think we're, it's past our bedtime. Okay.
Yes.
Happy to work. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. We'll see you at October 2nd.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Stay great to the end.
Yeah. Very interesting.